Most of us were never taught how to deal with grief. Not when a marriage ends, not when a parent fades, not when the life we pictured falls apart. We're told to move on, push it down, stay strong, stay busy. Today I'm sitting with Chris, a man who's lived through deep loss. He built grief circles and he hosts a podcast where he talks about grief. We talk about what grief really is, why it shows up as anger or silence, and what to do when it hits, and also how to notice it. We're also going to look at something a little deeper. How do we build something before the loss comes? A way to feel, to speak, and to stay human before the grief really hits. So if you're carrying old pain or fresh loss or just the quiet ache that won't leave, this might be a place, this might be something to listen to. Chris, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
I didn't I didn't realize until I read more of Brene Brown's work around shame what shame actually is or what it feels like. And I think grief is something similar, and that's what I wanted to talk with you about today. Just building up that literacy of noticing grief. How do you
Sorry.
name it?
That's a great question, Jeff. It's something that I am still trying to put in words to the best of my ability today. But what I will share with you guys as far as my grief journey I've been on, grief is something we all experience in our life, and it doesn't always have to be around death. It can be around a divorce, it could be around losing a job, losing a home, losing a relationship, or even losing yourself for that matter. It can exist in many areas. Uh, Grief is oftentimes described as a feeling we have when we go through a loss. And the best way that I describe it is that grief is a matter of the heart, it's not a matter of the mind. And so society has a way of consciously talking to us and telling us how to let go and move on and get over it and let it go. And those are all conscious directives to grief. But when grief lives in the heart, it's a matter of emotion and feeling. And it's a matter of something much deeper than our conscious mind.
How do you know it's grief, though?
It's grief when you feel something that you can't describe. Is the best way I can phrase that.
I've noticed like it's a really heavy feeling, and I've had it even in really superficial seeming losses, like not seeing a friend for a long time, or even just changing business strategies. Like there's still a point, a time of grieving where you have to feel that grief, and it just sits so heavy on you.
Yeah, grief kind of gives you this, best way I can share it with you guys. I lost my child to stillbirth 3 years ago. And I remember in that moment how heavy grief felt, like Jeff just said. And grief can be, it almost feels like 1,000 pound boulder sitting on your shoulders, crushing you. And you can't really get it off your shoulder for whatever reason. You feel like it suffocates you sometimes. It's very, very hard to move through it. And that's where, when I said it's a matter of the heart, it's not something we can consciously say, oh, I'm grieving and I should feel this way or I should do this to get over it. Our body won't really allow us to move that way with grief. What it really calls for us to do is to listen within and say, what am I actually feeling right now? What am I experiencing right now? And what am I being affected by? And that's where, when I talk about grief a lot in my coaching practice, I always say that this is going to be a lot of emotions all at once. If you went through something like I did, you might feel very heavy numbness in your body. You might feel just nothing at all. You might feel like you're existing in a space, but you're not really there. You might feel very angry about something, but anger is really just covering up what that deep emotion might be. And in my case, it was love for my son that's no longer here. And I'm missing and wishing that he was here, or I'm thinking about what my life might be like if he was here. Grief presents itself in very different ways. And it's a very personalized journey, something that everybody will experience, but in their own individual way.
I, I I'm glad you brought up love. I've heard grief described by Stephen Jenkinson as grief is when love has nowhere to go. And that one hits heavy for me. I don't know if that resonates with you.
It certainly does. Love is a big part of when we grieve. You and I have talked before this podcast, so I hope I'm not out of line when I say this, but you've gone through a divorce, so you lost a relationship, you lost somebody that you were with for many years, somebody you loved at one point or another. I lost my child that I barely got 24 hours with. We have love for these people in our life, otherwise we wouldn't have had those experiences. And on top of that, when love has nowhere to go, it will find a place to go. And that's why grief will oftentimes come out in ways of anger or sadness or numbness or frustration or overwhelm, come out in anxiety. Grief will always present itself in some other emotion capacity, but a lot of times what's underneath that is our love for that thing that we lost that's no longer part of our life.
What did nobody teach you about grief that you had to find out the hard way?
The hard way I had to figure out grief, I had two experiences in my life where that happened. My first one was when I watched my grandfather pass away from cancer in my arms in 2020. That was absolutely brutal. When I lost my child, that was even worse than that. And what I'll share about grief is that my own family, by the way, when those things went on, it was about quick fixing it. It was about how fast can we get back to normal, walking on with life like it never happened. In other circumstances, when I lost my child, it was you'll have another one. So it's this idea of replacement. I had to learn very hardly, though, that those ideologies don't actually help people through grief. And what I chose to do in my losses is I sat with my grief. I sat in the fire, as I like to call it. And it's very uncomfortable. It's very unpleasant. There's a lot of very heavy emotions that you have to learn and hold space for to understand how you really feel. And so I share that to say that grief, it takes you a lot to learn what that actually is for you and what it makes you feel and how you experience it. Grief is not there's not a 12-step guide for grief. There's not a one size fits all box to say, here's how to deal with it or here's how to work through it. Nobody taught me, by the way, that grief can become our biggest teacher. It can become our biggest gift. And it's something that doesn't always have to be a big, heavy pain, but it can also be something that frees us up in our own life and helps us learn powerful lessons that can move us into a new version of ourselves in the future. Because ultimately, when we go through a loss, we're no longer the person we were before that happened. That person sheds skin like a snake. And what we are left with is stepping into this future person, this new person we're becoming. And so grief is uncertain and uncomfortable for that reason. We're shedding who we were to step into who we're becoming.
It's tough when you're in it, and I think you're describing that process of becoming somebody new. But how do you even get to that place when you're first going through that grief? Say somebody passing away. I can't imagine my losing a son or losing a daughter. How do you even get to that place, like where you don't get lost in that grief? Like you don't just get buried in the boulder. Like what's the crack?
I think that in my own experience, because I didn't have a lot of support when I went through losing my child or my grandfather, I had to navigate those things by myself. You're going to go to some very dark places. I'm just going to say that. And I'm going to say this very controversially to what society has told you. Those dark places shine a lot of light in areas of your life that you need. And that dark place, by the way, teaches you about yourself. It teaches you what you were trying to feel all along in your life, but never had space to, or never told, or never shown how, or never guided to. It's going to give you those things. And, that's where, when you're trying to wade through grief, I can say you can't confidently avoid those things. They're going to happen. But the place in grief that's really powerful, that's the hardest place to get to, is acceptance of it. And acceptance is the first step in grief, I believe, that can really set you on a path to seeing the gifts and lessons and blessings of that moment. When you're in the initial throes of grief, it's very hard because you're experiencing a lot of very powerful, very heavy emotions, things that you may not have experienced or allowed yourself to feel before. And so it's like stepping into a whole new area and environment, and you're trying to relearn and regrow and understand things. And when we get into that phase of acceptance, it doesn't mean we like it. It doesn't mean we, have peace with it. It certainly is not comfortable. But it's this place that says, I'm going to stop fighting reality right now. And that's where we have to get to that place to say, like my example is always, my son died. Nothing I say or do is going to change that. It's always going to be that, no matter what I say or do. But if I accept that, I can free myself from that burden of grief in many ways, and I can actually start finding ways to make purpose and meaning of that experience in life.
You started grief circles and you run grief conferences. And I imagine that's a process of helping you through the grieving process. What has that work taught you that maybe being in the grief didn't?
The best thing that it taught me being in grief circles and being part of grief conferences this last year is that grief is such an individual experience, but it's also something very beautiful. It really is, because I have seen people across different countries, different cultures, different backgrounds, different belief systems, different environments. They've gone through grief in very different ways than I have. And they have actually shown me and helped me see things that I couldn't see on my own. And so I walked out of those experiences with a level of gratitude and empathy and appreciation and a deeper level of understanding of my own grief that I thought I had mostly understood, but there were parts of it I didn't see until I went through those experiences with other people. And so it's been a powerful, powerful experience for me to be a part of those.
I think one of the themes that I'm sensing here is you had to navigate a lot of this on your own. What is what are we missing when we don't have some sort of ritual around grief?
I think what we're missing is a deeper understanding of who we are. And and I'll ask you a question, Jeff. How many times have you ran into something in life that you didn't know or didn't fully understand, and the first thing that came to mind was, I will jump on my phone and click Google. Google knows, right?
Sure. Yeah, a million times.
Million times, right? How often do we actually sit there without that smartphone and without Google, by the way, and we just say, I got to figure this out on my own. I got to find some answers.
Yeah, not often.
Not often.
It's these big things that they're based around wisdom, and you don't get wisdom, I find, from Google. You get factual answers. So that's what kind of what I'm alluding to in my question is what was missing that you had to navigate this on your own.
What was missing was a deep, deep appreciation and understanding that I have the answers within me. I don't need to seek them externally. And I think the wisdom that we are missing today in society, collectively as a whole, is we lean on social media for a lot of things. We lean on Google to tell us answers. The sad part is that when we jump on those worlds, what we're effectively doing is using instant gratification to shortcut our emotions or shortcut our way to the top. And so we miss out that process in the middle, which is self discovery, self acceptance, self understanding. We miss all those things because we're so quick to say, well, Google told me this is the answer, so this must be true. But oftentimes, is it really? Is that actually aligning with who you are, or is it actually what you believe? Is it something that's making you feel better, or was that just an instant gratification to make you avoid the feelings or avoid what you're going through so you don't have to feel pain? Because when we do that, we miss out on wisdom, we miss out on an experience, we also miss out on finding meaning and purpose on a deeper level, not just through grief, but about who we're becoming and who we are.
I know you talked about discovering yourself and a deeper connection with yourself, but what else are you missing when you don't go through that grieving process? Like what happens like what happens if you don't allow yourself to feel it? Like what if you just push it down and ignore it?
So, something that I learned through losing my son, and I'm going to share this with everybody because we all have these moments in life, but we forget what they teach us. Back to your rule of wisdom you're talking about today. I was making a box for my son's ashes. I was a woodworker. And one day the wood was not cooperating, and I was having a big grief bomb in my head that I was not paying attention to. I was not giving space for. I wasn't asking, what am I feeling right now? I threw that thing on the floor and stepped on it because I thought I'd crush it. And long story short, the wood won. I lost. I crushed my heel. Was in a boot for 6 weeks on crutches. It was not a fun time. As I was going up the stairs from my basement on my hands and knees, cussing and screaming in pain because it hurt like crazy, what came out about 5, 10 minutes after that was that I was really upset because my son wasn't here. That was actually a lot of love for my son that was coming out in that anger mode. So when we don't listen to our grief, when we don't hold space for it, and we don't actually take time to process those emotions, it will come out in those ways like I experienced, where you might end up in a boot for 6 weeks on crutches because you didn't sit there for a minute and say, I'm actually feeling this about my grief. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling upset. I feel angry. I feel like I'm losing something. When we don't take time to go within and we're always seeking things externally, we lose ourselves in the grief process, and we also lose what grief is trying to teach us.
And I imagine if you run away from it, or you can run away from it and lose yourself in the bottle or in work, or I imagine that blows up in other areas of life. Like it's very easy to lose your relationship, your business, anything else you've built up just because you're carrying around that heaviness all the time.
It's very, grief is a very powerful experience, and it's a very powerful emotion. And just like you said, Jeff, I've met many people, by the way, that went through losing a child like I did, and they got divorced. It was a bad divorce. And the reason that happened, by the way, grief was not being understood and given space. And we also had that breakdown of one partner's grieving one way, the other partner's grieving the other. They didn't come together and say, let's try to work this together, or let's try to understand our grief and work through this. I also had another person I know that turned to drinking after losing a child, ended up with a DUI, and ended up in jail. Um, so when we don't deal with our grief, and when I say deal with it, I mean listen to it and understand it and give ourselves space to process it, it will come out in other areas of our life. And that's where, unfortunately, grief can become a negative thing when its outlet becomes those circumstances that cause different issues for us.
How can you build that preventative layer so that maybe you catch grief a little sooner um, before you break your heel? Like how do you learn to prepare yourself? Maybe you're not in grief right now, but at some point you're gonna experience grief. Like that's just part of life. Is it possible to build up almost, I don't want to call it an immunity, but a callus maybe, without numbing yourself?
That's a very powerful question. What I'll share is that all of us who are going to experience grief on a various different level, there's really no way for us to avoid it because we're humans. And humans, contrary to societal beliefs, we're very emotional people. We are. We spend so much of our life and our day trying to avoid emotions. And the biggest one that comes up in grief, by the way, is that, well, you can't sit in your grief. You can't be stuck in your grief. Grief is negative. It's, if you can't get over it and let go of it or move on, life is happening. You're going to miss something or you're going to ruin your life. And so To build up an immunity to grief, I think is come down the terms for me of acceptance and understanding that you're going to go through something in life that you're going to lose, whether that's a person, a relationship, a job, yourself, even at a certain point. You're going to go through those things. I think giving yourself the empathy and the strength to know that when you go through those things, you are going to feel emotions. You're going to feel angry. You're going to feel sad. You're going to feel upset. You're going to wish things were different. You're going to say, well, if I had done this, maybe not this outcome. You're going to have all those things. The point of the story that I'm sharing is stop denying yourself those things like society tries to push you to do. Stop doing that. When you have those things happen, understand how your body feels. If you've ever been angry, by the way, or ever gotten angry, you know there's a little thing in your chest that starts going up to your throat really fast, and you feel your heart start beating quickly. You feel a little bit more warm in your face. You feel some tension in your body. Those are warning signs that come up through grief, just like they do in anger. The same thing happens. The only difference is that in order for us to have an immunity to these situations, what we want to try to do is recognize when we feel that way. And what we want to say instead, by the way, is not I am statements like I am angry or I am sad or I am frustrated. Acknowledge yourself and say, I feel this way right now, or I'm feeling this way because I just lost my job. I'm feeling this way because I just lost my husband. I lost my child. I lost my spouse. I lost my job. I feel lost in life right now. I have no idea what I'm trying to do. I don't know what the hell's going on. Be honest with yourself in that moment because that's where grief won't take over you. That's where grief will walk beside you. And that's where it can actually be something that helps you and doesn't hurt you.
Prefer to think of it as an experience rather. I like that you said not I am. So it's an experience rather than something that you are, that you identify with. You call yourself an acceptance coach and not a healer. What's going on under there? That what's the nuance there that you're trying to capture when you're walking people through that grief process?
So I'm really glad you asked that because I do work in the grief space and you can hear titles all day long in my space. You'll hear life coach and grief coach and healer, as you said. Truth be told, I'm not really any of those things. But what I do is I help people get to that first stage of acceptance because I believe that everybody has the answers within them. I believe that. And I know that when we seek everything externally, we're never going to find those answers because we're burying it with Google and whatever social media told us, and where we're covering things up. The reason I call myself an acceptance coach is because when I come across people for clients or even in grief circles and things like that, acceptance is the hardest part that we all struggle with. All of us do, including myself, by the way. I'm not immune to it. I went through it in my losses. The acceptance piece really helps people get out of that hurtful place of grief, and it moves them into a place of taking back control of their life and control of their decisions. And it gets them into a place where they are deeper listening within themselves and they're not seeking things externally. And that's where I help people walk through that place of pulling those answers out of themselves, getting in touch with themselves again. As my client I'm working with right now says, I'm trying to figure out who the hell I am at 59 years old because I didn't know who I've been the last 20 years. And I don't like that person anymore. I want to be this person. I help them walk through that phase through acceptance. And when they do find that, by the way, all the answers come pouring out of them. I always joke on my coaching calls because I talk maybe 20% of the time. My clients talk 80% of the time. When I hear them pull their answers out, it's a very beautiful thing.
You've been holding these circles in your community and your conference, and I imagine your grief has maybe not fully processed. I don't know that you ever fully process grief. So what grief is still remaining, and what are you looking to learn from that?
You know, Jeff, I'm really glad you brought that up because one of my very first podcasts I did way back in January, I had a guy ask, He told me, he said, "You sound fully healed from everything." And I said, "That's furthest from the truth. I'll never be fully healed." And he looked at me and said, "Why don't you want to be fully healed?" And I said, "Because it's not possible. It isn't." And he asked me, "Why is that?" And I said the following to him: if you go through grief and you become fully healed, you will have zero emotional connection, feeling, or belief or thought about that experience. And you will be able to say the following: I went through losing something in my life, person, job, relationship. That thing just happened. It's just a chapter in my life. I'm completely free of that as I go forward. Now, the thing that's missing in that equation of fully healed is that that means that we have no emotional connection to things. And as I know about people, and I've talked to a lot of them, we're emotional people. We don't forget. We never forget how people made us feel. We don't forget things people say. We live with those things. And when someone walks along, by the way, and reminds us of that person or reminds us of that situation, it comes right back to us. So I know that about people. So what I like to say is that grief is not something you're ever going to get over or fully be healed from, but it's something that you should learn how to move forward with and carry it alongside you. Because in that space, by the way, grief will not become a very big, loud thing that will be a dysfunction in your life. What it will be, by the way, is a very helpful tool and a very helpful guide that will help you walk the journey forward in the new version of yourself. And it will become something that I teach people about. It will become an empowerment of your life. It will not be a thing that holds you back.
The last question I want to ask you is, what is the one piece of gratitude that you've found as a result of this journey? So all of this grief you've experienced, losing your grandfather, losing your son, what is the one piece of gratitude that stands out above all?
One piece of gratitude I will share with everybody is the following. All of those things in my life, they happened for me. They didn't happen to me. They made me a stronger person. They put me on a course to go out there and serve other people in the capacity in which I'm doing today, working in the grief space and helping other people navigate grief and discover all the gifts that their grief is giving them. So my biggest gratitude I can share with you is that I didn't like what happened and how it happened. It was very, very hard for me to go through. But all of those situations and moments gave me everything that I needed to grow as a person, become a better man, become a great coach in this field to help other people. And so I want to leave everybody with the following: that when you are going through the depths of your grief, it'll be very, very hard to see what I just talked about, which is that these things are happening for you. They're not happening to you. The biggest thing I would share with you guys as far as gratitude with grief is the following. All these grief moments that you're going to go through, whether you're losing somebody in your family, in your life, you're losing a relationship, you're losing a job, or you're losing yourself, I want you to know that those moments are happening for you. They're giving you a big gift. They're giving you a lesson, or they're giving you a blessing in your life. And it's very, very hard to see that in the initial stages of going through grief. But I want you to know that there's a point in time in your grief journey where those things will show themselves to you. And that will be the point in which you will come to acceptance for what has been, and you will be stepping into the person you're becoming. And it will put you on a path to create a very inspiring future in your life. And you will always look back, by the way, and say, I'm grateful for how these things happen. I'm grateful for what they taught me. I'm grateful for how they played out. I can tell you right now, I wouldn't change how those moments played out in my life, believe it or not, because I would never be the person I am today and doing the work I'm doing had that not happened to me.
Yeah, that's real gratitude when you go through something horrible and you decide, you realize you wouldn't change anything. You still go through it. Yeah. Yeah. That's really powerful. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being on, Chris. I really appreciate it. I know this is a heavy topic, but I think you did a wonderful job of sharing, and I'm grateful to have you here.
Well, Jeff, thank you for having me as a guest on your podcast this morning. It's been a true pleasure to get to meet you this year and have the conversations we've had so far. You've had some rough walks of life like I have, and you're doing beautiful work in your space. And I love your new adventure you're going on right now to create in the coaching world. It's very well needed, and I'm just glad I got to connect with you this year.
Likewise. So let's leave it there. Grief doesn't end. I think it just changes shape. Sometimes it softens, sometimes it hardens, but I don't think it ever disappears. And Chris, thanks for reminding us that you don't have to carry it alone, and you don't have to wait for a disaster to build something really solid. And things like circles and questions, deep questions and breath, just finding yourself, that all matters and it keeps us human. Something in this conversation stirred you, sit with it, feel into it, listen. There's something in there for you. And I'll see you next time.